everyone, welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers, Josh and Dan. I'm Dan.
I'm Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things egressical. Get to that in a second or so. Because this way to the great egress, we're going to talk about the adventure known as The Way Out in Throal Adventures from 1st edition, or otherwise known as Westhrall's Passage from Classic 3rd edition, whatever you want to call it. So if you have any questions about this today, please contact us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com, and we will do an email palooza episode when we get your emails, because right now I don't think we have any. So by all means, get a hold of us soon and hear us talk at you. So, Josh, first impressions of this adventure or any memories you may have.
I have run this one.
Oh, cool. I have not.
My biggest memories of this adventure involve...
Total party kill?
No.
Okay.
I did not get a total party kill on this. I ran this for my first long-term Earthdawn group, the one that I kind of tell all the stories about.
Of course.
And the thing that stands out for me about this adventure when I ran it is that at one point, my friend Doug, who played Mika, the Swordmaster, this is the same Doug who is immortalized as making the Tiskrang in the character generation chapter of the Player's Guide. And Mika, the Swordmaster, shows up in some of the examples in that book as well. There's a point here in this where my player character group did a whole bunch of planning, and then he basically went and kicked things off. Ranger. He was a Chaos Gremlin.
Okay.
He was the kind of player who would do stuff to kick things off. I think when I ran Pale River, whatever it was, the first Throal adventure that we talked about.
Yeah.
It might have been in this one as well. But like he was told to stay up and guard the entrance to the tunnel that the rest of the group like followed the Tiskrang down through, and then he decided after a few minutes that he was bored and went down after them. Like that kind of thing.
So he was Leroy Jenkins before there was Leroy Jenkins.
He was kind of a Leroy Jenkins, yes.
Affectionately speaking.
Affectionately speaking. He was a swordmaster. He had smoke, the thread weapon smoke.
Oh.
All that he needed to do in order to finish weaving the thread to it was to find Mirror, which I planned to have happen but never did. He did show up in a cameo in a game that one of the people that played in that ran later, set like a few years later, showed up as a dual discipline swordmaster air sailor.
Yeah.
And was running around with the orc daughter of the human air sailor that was his companion. So this is like she was grown up and was now an air sailor. Anyway.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Fair. I'm glad there are good memories for this one. So we did finally figure out through a combination of I have both versions, the Throal and the Shards Collection Volume 2, the Throal Adventures and Shards Collection Volume 2, and through Lou posting from our previous episode about the previous adventure in Throal Adventures, that this one was written by Sean Rhodes.
Yes.
Well done, Sean, is what we're going to say.
Yeah, let me check something real quick. I think... Yeah, Sean Rhodes wrote the Tiskrang chapter for Denizens and the Serpent River book. He was the primary writer for both of those. He was the one that largely defined what the Tiskrang are in Barsave.
Nice. So
Lou has often talked about how
beautiful that stuff was.
Well, yeah, how influential he was in shaping the Tiskrang the way they are.
Yeah, no lie. I'm glad that this is the second adventure in Throal Adventures of the 3 that does include more pale ones, Tiskrang underground, because again, you're going under the kingdom of Throal for the 3rd time in the adventure series.
Yes. This one is a little bit more straightforward in some regards.
Yeah.
The basic premise of this is that the adventurers are approached by
Ella Pono,
who works for the Great Library, who says that she has found a scrap of what appears to be a map of the underground tunnels, the underground river tunnels below the Kingdom of Throal that were used during the First Theron War to help lift the siege of the kingdom.
Yes.
And the sort of route to the outside, to the Serpent River, or technically the Coil River, but the route to the Serpent River network from below the kingdom was more or less lost or thought lost. And if this is actually accurate and a way can be found, then that would be incredibly valuable information to have.
Yes.
And so this is basically the group gets hired to accompany the expedition and to explore it and the things that they encounter along the way.
Yes, because I think the king, and this takes place obviously way before Varulus and Nedden, during Varulus's reign, because he's still alive. And so I think the king wants to block this off. So they want it stopped.
Yeah, well, or at least be aware of where it is so that it can be watched.
Yes.
In the future.
Yeah. So during this time, there's not a whole lot going on. There's not a war going on, but the king wants this mapped completely. And there's also some other little political stuff going on in the background, which is more fun for the game master to figure out when they read this one. So basically, you're researching something in the Library of Throal, and you're approached by Elapono, and there's money, of course, up front. There's money going to be at the back end. This is actually kind of a lot of cash. So like 1,200 silver pieces up front, maybe 2,000 more when you're done. And you also get to use and I like how Sean, the writer, put this all out, use your streetwise skills, use your conversation skills, your research skills on the person hiring you, because they're a known figure working for the kingdom. So there might be some information about this. And also, you get to go plan and go maybe through the Grand Bazaar again to buy supplies and provisions, although they're going to provide most of them. It's 15 to 20 days out, 10 to 15 days back, if all goes well. So this is a good month-long journey.
Yeah.
And all kinds of good things. There is also, however, a blood oath that Elapono is going to ask you to swear to. That way you don't reveal anything about this location, because it is secret and could be used to infiltrate the kingdom. So
yes, it is vital to the kingdom's safety that information about this does not get out prior to it being able to be dealt with to whatever extent the crown wants to. Mm-hmm. And so the blood oath is just simply, for a year and a day, you promise to keep the information about the expedition and its outcome secret. Yeah.
And the blood oath is also to help try and keep everybody else alive.
Yes.
So that you don't just take the money, kill everybody, and go about your business, because you are, again, heroes. And so there's part of the blood oath and the money, I think, that's involved with keeping everybody else in the party alive, because she's also hired two T'Skrang Pale Ones and a dwarf caretaker to help you go under Throal and to help navigate the river underneath the kingdom, because unless you are a T'Skrang in your party, pretty much hiring these two who dwell down there and know the rivers, these are your best guides. And so she has already done so. So this reminds you, once again, this is the third trip under the Kingdom of Throal through caverns and waterways. Game Master, brush up on episode 192, your underground exploration, your light source visibility tables, your perception rules. And now, by the way, as written in the adventure, swimming may come into play, and you are reminded in this adventure, Obsidian can't swim.
Yeah. And windlings aren't particularly fond of it either.
Yeah. So, rafting as well.
While there is water involved in the first adventure in Pale River, it is not one that involves extensive river travel and such.
Yeah. You have to figure out why the river's not going. This is the one you're actually going to be riding on the river on a raft. And so there's reminders in here for the Game Master to how to tie up your possessions so they don't sink, because the river's moving. If it falls, it's behind you and in the dark and underwater. So 3 things you don't want to have happen to your stuff, especially if you're carrying any kind of, I don't know, magical weapons or threat items. So one of those things. So one, there's basically like 5 or 6 parts to this. I broke them down. 1 is you get approached by Ella and hired. 2 is you begin meeting the other 2 T'Skrang and descending underneath Throal and start with the rules about visibility and darkness and so forth and so on. Number 3, You begin doing mapping milestones in the adventure instead of doing something every foot along the map. So this is actually more broad strokes, plot points to the adventure versus, hey, draw this little bit left turn, draw this little bit right turn, draw this little drop. No, that's boring and tedious. This is adventurous, and we want to have that.
There is effectively 20 milestones, and these aren't actual like miles per se.
Yes.
For the purposes of the story, there are
Events.
sort of 20 points that you go past, 20 sort of encounters / story locations / whatever, and there is navigation and exploration that is involved in getting to them. And so this is one of those adventures where, because you are in an isolated area and you've only got so many supplies, this is one of those adventures that is kind of dealing with the wilderness survival type of thing.
Yeah.
It does talk about how it is possible, perhaps, to use fishing or things like that to get additional supplies from the river, but in certain areas, they're likely, like when you're near Brazza's kingdom, which is more corrupted and so forth, you're not as likely to get things that are helpful. That whole aspect of it is something that only takes up like a couple of pages, but it is the overall framework, and at various points along the way, you are going to have various encounters or things that might happen to break up the monotony or incidents or whatnot. And some of them are kind of like standalone little things, but there actually is a pretty significant story arc of sorts that develops as the characters make their way along the river.
And it's basically, and it still comes down to a roll of the dice, but one person makes the roll based upon your navigation and your exploring, but other people are allowed to help. And so that boosts the step number that this one person rolls. And so it still does come down to a roll of the dice, but the more everybody chips in teamwork wise, the higher that number gets to be. And so you can get these done a little bit faster. So I like the mechanic that they included for this. I would like to see that explored in other adventures, but I think this was very well done because the things you can encounter, aside from just the plot points of this mile, you can come across a brain sponge, carnivorous toadstools are mentioned, mind slugs, and a couple of Jehuthra, just because they're big spiders in a nice dark cave. Why would they be left out? But it also does remind the Game Master to get the characters into the adventuring rhythm and routine, travel, night watches, resource management of food, so forth and so on, just to get everybody involved in the, I can't say the monotony, but the rhythm of travel, rest, and so forth and so on. So it's nice, well-paced
This is
adventure.
one where the exploration is as much an aspect of it. There might be cases where the journey is sort of elided or skimmed over in order to get to the next bit.
Yeah.
In this, the actual journey itself and the tests involved and whatnot are part of that experience. The purpose of it is you are doing this thing that, like, the primary objective is the exploration and mapping and charting of these underground waterways to see if this map is accurate. And in the course of doing that, you come across a problem that you then need to deal with.
Yeah. So
with some other sort of like side encounters along the way for flavor and interest and variety.
Yeah. So those are the first three things you got to do. Fourth is you finally get to enter the Great Dome of Yatravash. And this is where it begins to become a if-then statement to the adventure. It's a little railroady because it has to be, going down the river at the river's pace. You can't avoid that part. But once you finally get to the Great Dome, still under the mountains, you meet the Pale Ones and possibly challenge to ritual combat. Possibly the island is attacked by river raiders and the Abanos to Strang, otherwise known as the Ragul. And then you also get to meet the Shivilahala and trade story and storytelling. So a lot happens just in the dome itself.
Yes. One of the sort of key points that leads up when the group kind of first arrives in the dome is they come across ruined / abandoned villages.
Yeah.
That start to give a little bit of foreshadowing to what they are going to be dealing with a little bit later. evidence that something has been going on here that's been causing problems for the Pale One villages that are down here in this part of the caverns. And then they eventually come to a village where there are still Tiskrang and learn a little bit about what's going on and the troubles that have been plaguing the area, and learn a little bit about what lies downstream.
Yeah, and you will find remains of previous excursions for this exact same purpose.
Yeah.
So other people were hired, not by Ilapono, but other people were hired to finish this map, and they didn't make it.
Yeah,
so.
other folks have had expeditions down here and whatnot, because, as is mentioned at the very beginning, if a route can be found into the kingdom that doesn't pass through the gates, that is a potentially useful smuggling route.
Mm-hmm.
There are a whole bunch of things that could potentially be put to use if that's the case, regardless.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it is, indication is given that things are dangerous down here from both the initial encounters with various hazardous flora and fauna, especially as you get closer to the edges of Braza's kingdom.
Yep.
But then you get into the cavern and start seeing what's been happening to the Tiskrang villages and some other expeditions that you find remains of and whatnot. So there is a very, like, kind of, once you've gotten into the, as you say, the rhythm of the expedition, then you get into, okay, now here is the problem that we need to deal with in order to finish things and end our expedition.
Exactly.
And that is basically that there is, further downstream at what's called the Dragon's Jaw, there is a camp that has been established that has enslaved members of the Tiskrang villages in the dome.
Yeah.
And a little bit of history comes into play here because the slaveholders, the people sort of running this mine that they're using the Tiskrang to excavate, are members of the exiled Throalic families. There were a couple of noble houses that were exiled during the Death Rebellion, which was connected to the events in the third novel, Poisoned Memories.
Right.
When Nedin was abducted and they were attempting to turn him into a magically influenced pawn of the Therans. And so the noble families that were working with the Therans in that were sort of rising up against Varolus and the royal line were exiled from the kingdom. And these are related to them. They're the ones that are sort of running this mine and have a little bit of a association with the Therans, but they basically are unhappy with Throal and would be very interested in seeing things not go well, and so therefore are not particularly friendly to the player characters. And generally at this point, because of what they have seen thus far, the player characters are likely to want to do something about what's going on, because of course they have learned of the troubles that the Tiskrang are facing, and so therefore will kind of want to do something about it, in part because they may have been asked to by the Lahala of the village that they do visit.
Yeah.
But also just in general, they are not likely to be able to slip past the camp without being noticed, because the river narrows quite a bit there. The camp is basically built right there at the Dragon's Jaws.
Yeah.
And even if, because of the way things are framed, these are slavers down below the kingdom, and generally we would want to deal with them. And this was where my dwarf swordmaster friend, after all sorts of planning to figure out how they were going to deal with the slave masters here in the camp, decided that talking had gone on too long and charged in and started killing folks.
Leroy Jenkins style.
Yeah, Leroy Jenkins style. That was sort of my memory on that. And it is a potentially difficult fight, just in terms of the numbers that you are going to be dealing with.
Yeah, it's an encampment, and you're a band of maybe, 4, 5, 6 tops?
Yeah, something to that effect. But it is also a sort of reinforced watch. There is a riverboat that they're using to perform their raids and whatnot. I think those are the Tiskrang that were doing the raids that you might run into earlier.
Yeah.
It's their boat.
It is. No. It is. It's their boat. That's the Ragul. They are stationed at the encampment, and you've got, this is, like I said, the ever branching if-then statement of, do you attack the encampment? Do you slip by and ignore the slaving? Or were you captured earlier and now you're part of the slaves and you have to do the whole rebellion? So there's a whole bunch of things to do there. Or do you cripple the riverboat and kind of even the odds, but not fix the slavers or not cause a mass uprising? I mean, there's many, many ways.
Yeah, according to the numbers here, there are 100 raiders. There are 30 dwarves from House Endauer. And there are 40 Abanos sailors.
Yeah.
And then there are the officers and captains who are all boatman adepts. So there are 2 first circle, 1 second, and 2 third. The captain is a 7th circle, and the 4 senior officers are all 4th circle. And so they've got the stat blocks and stuff there for them. And so, yeah, there is definitely some planning and whatnot that needs to happen. The difficulty is just in the sheer numbers that they need to deal with.
Yes.
It's recommended for 3rd and 4th circle characters. They will not have much trouble dealing with the sort of mundane folks, except just for the fact that there are many of them, and if they're not careful, it is very easily to be harried and or overwhelmed. And just with the law of averages, dice are going to explode.
Yeah.
So even a moderately skilled mundane person is, especially when you've got a bunch of them, are likely to be danger to adepts.
Yeah, significant.
3rd and 4th circle are pretty tough, but they're not indestructible.
Agreed. And just to help you out a little bit, the writer of this adventure also threw in an orc liberator who's there to help out in case you are taken captive earlier and are now joining the enslaved to do your uprising. The orc liberator there will help you out a little bit. But my main problem with the map included in both editions of Throal Adventures and the Shards Collection Volume 2 is that they're listing out what things look like, and they go through A through, I think, like L, really. A, B, C, D, so forth and so on. E and F are described, but are not located on the maps. There is no E circle, there is no F circle on either one of the maps.
You're talking about the map of the location?
Of the encampment, yes. At the Dragon's Jaw. So there's no E, there's no F, they just don't exist. So they're described in paragraphs on the previous page. You can find them if you look hard enough, but they're just not labeled E and F with a little black circle. They're just not there. So, warning to the Game Masters, don't look too hard. I looked for you. They don't exist. So, the last thing to do in the adventure, because this is a lot otherwise to go through, there's a possibility, like I said, that you're captured and used as slave labor. This is where you're possibly interrogated. And so with the meeting, the Lahala at the Dome of Yetravash, there's a possibility there of a lot of ROLE playing and maybe some ritual combat, so you get to try out those things for anybody who takes up that challenge. There's a prison break possibly, liberation possibly, freeing the slaves.
There is a liberator that is among the slaves.
Yep.
That can work with the group. And the liberator is there regardless of whether the player characters get captured or not.
Agreed.
But if they do manage to defeat the folks at the encampment initially, the main thought is that the raiders are going to be away when the player characters attack, just because it makes the numbers a little bit less terrifying. But they've got a raft, so they wouldn't be able to take
many with them.
The raft back upstream to get folks back up to the dome. And so there's the question of, well, what are we going to do with these folks?
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of, yes, we need to finish this expedition, but we've also got this problem that we need to deal with. This is a really cool adventure.
Agreed.
Honestly, out of the 3 in here, this one is probably my favorite, because despite the fact that it is, in terms of page count, about the same page count as the others,
yeah,
it takes more in-game time to do. It is a longer expedition and feels like it's got a lot more stuff going on in it as a result.
Yeah.
we've talked about with a couple of the others how there are perhaps opportunities that you could expand or stretch things out a little bit with them, but not dramatically so, I don't think. This one you absolutely could.
Oh, yes.
There is sort of a time limit because you've only got so many supplies, but you've got a whole bunch of milestones, sort of navigation points, and the GM could be free to flesh out certain aspects of that, especially in the earlier part of it a little bit more if they want to, because the latter sections are the ones that are revolving around the dome and the encampment and the mines and such.
Yeah, and I think even given the short page count that this really could have been expanded to maybe 80 or 96 page count for a slightly longer adventure.
Like potentially. I honestly think that the brevity of it in that sense prevents it from feeling bloated.
Fair. Or overwhelming.
In the course of a page or two, you cover like the first third or more of the milestones.
Yeah.
Before you even get to the dome. And some of it is just strange underground flora or fauna that you encounter, a couple of combat encounters like with the Jehuthra and stuff. But unlike, say, Deep Trouble, where there are a couple of combat encounters before you get to the horror at the end, because of the time scale involved, those are encounters that serve to use up player character resources to sort of soften them up a little bit, perhaps before the boss fight. And that is not quite the case here.
No.
While there is a time limit in terms of the supplies that you have, in terms of food and whatnot, there is otherwise no time pressure. And so there is an opportunity, if player characters get too injured or whatever, for them to have plenty of time to rest and recuperate, or to rebuild karma stores. Because in first edition, you know, you'd have to do a ritual and you could only buy so many points per day. And so if you had used up a lot of karma, there is an opportunity to sort of buy it back.
Yeah.
So it's a very different feel. There's a lot to it. I just really like overall this sort of exploration adventure story with the discovery at the tail end of this
moral
secret
quandary.
Yeah, well, it's not even really I wouldn't consider it a moral quandary.
Fair. Sorry.
You've got this encampment of exiled dwarves and a bunch of river pirates that are enslaving the pale ones there in this part of the caverns. There's no moral dilemma there.
Sorry.
You are the ones that are there. There's no like, oh, well, we'll go back and we'll get help.
Yeah.
It's just you.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess to a certain extent you could try and just sneak by and not worry about it, but that's, I think most player characters, and I suspect, because I haven't really read this in depth, I seem to recall, though, that there is some pushback by the Tiskrang, the Pale One guides that are with you to do something about it. So I don't consider it a moral quandary. It's more just like, okay, you have encountered this situation. What are you going to do about it?
Fair. Poor choice of words on my part. I was fumbling for something to
Yeah, no, I get what you were saying, but I just wanted to elaborate.
No, please do, because I had the poor choice of words on my part. So by all means, but I like the fact that it's got a nice framework laid out without getting too into the weeds on the details of every single thing. So maybe for a standalone adventure, increase the page count by about 10 or 12 pages. It doesn't need to go to a whole 96 or whatnot to really flesh it out. But this is cool.
And there is a lot of flexibility, like even though in some ways it is kind of a railroad because you're just following the river through the caverns, there's not like a lot of variety to go off script to a certain extent. But there is a decent amount of flexibility for groups to address the major problem as they wish and as befits their abilities.
Yeah.
If you don't have a group that is particularly combat heavy, they may come up with a different approach in how they deal with the encampment and whatnot. They may intentionally infiltrate the slave pens or, do something, intentionally get captured so that they can be sort of on the inside and try and deal with things that way. Like, there is quite a bit of flexibility of approach in terms of how the player characters can address the primary problem here.
Agreed. And it was written for, of course, 6 to 8 characters of third or fourth circle. So you don't want to run this one first, but you don't want to run it last if you're doing a string of all these at one time.
Yeah.
I think there's 3 good options. You could run them all strung together in some fashion, but since the middle one's written for a higher circle,
Deep Trouble would probably be the last one of those, because that's the one that's like for mid-journeyman, like 6th and 7th circle.
Yeah.
Actually, Purloined Provisions, the first one, is actually sort of for 5th circle characters.
Yeah.
So A Way Out is, as the recommended circles are, that would sort of be the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually probably like a better introduction, because it is a longer expedition in the tunnels and a different exposure to the Pale Ones. Like, I think it's a better first meeting with them.
Yeah.
Because then you get Purloined Provisions, which deals with the Pale Ones again, but it is a much sort of shorter and more direct kind of thing that starts off as, there are thefts that are going on. We're sort of hired to kind of help look into that. It's the Pale Ones. We have experience with them. Let's go see what we can do to help them out. And this particular village has this problem and we deal with it.
Yeah. Because between the 2 different adventures, there's 2 different sets of Pale Ones you're going to meet. So 2 completely different, separate parts of the cave that they may not even be aware of one another. They could be. Who knows? But I like all 3 presented in this book. I think all of them are very well done. And only one of them includes a horror that you directly entangle with. But this one kind of skirts maybe a horror's realm, or some tainted or corrupt places, and maybe some tainted or corrupt life forms down there. Jehuthra comes to mind, and the tainted fish you might be able to fish for. And so I like the fact that it's not relying on a horror being the bad guy for all 3, and that the other evils that are done by other name givers are at least responsible for 2 of them.
Yeah.
So I like the variety in the adventures of this one. I especially love, like I said, this one starts off railroady, but branches out into a huge set of if-then statements from there. So just like the branches of a tree, one trunk, but many different branches to go down. So I think very well done. Sean Rhodes, I would have loved to have seen more from you on this or anything else you've done, but Lou's a fan, so am I.
Yeah.
So, folks, if you have any questions for us, or if you've run this as well and have a nice chaos agent that you ran through this one like Josh did, please drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, find the proper way out of your moral quandary for your legend.
Good night, everybody.